जय श्री राम
और एक बार बोल
जय श्री राम
जय हनुमान बोल
जय हनुमान
और एक बार बोल
Mob lynchings, riots, vilification, arrests. That's the cycle of featherization of India's Muslims that has heightened post-2014. And it's fueled further by controversial laws like the Citizenship Amendment Act, the Love Jihad law, and the open calls by leaders to identify
ये आग लगाने वाले कौन हैं? वो उनके कपड़ों से ही पता चल जाता है
and target the community.
8 तारीख के सुबह ही परिवार के साथ 10 बजे के पहले कमल के निशान पर बटन दबाएंगे और मित्रों इतनी जोर से दबाना वो बटन की करंट से ही 8 तारीख की शाम को शाहीन बाग वाले उठ कर चले जाए।
ट्रंप के जाने तक तो हम शांति से जा रहे हैं, लेकिन उसके बाद हम आपकी भी नहीं सुनेंगे अगर रास्ते खाली नहीं हुए तो। ठीक है।
In the midst of this, India's Muslims continue to negotiate with an increasing environment of discrimination. And joining us to discuss on these issues and more is the prolific author and journalist Mr. Ziya Us Salam. His books describe both the issues within the Muslim community and the ones that surround it. In his upcoming book, Being a Muslim, Mr. Ziya Us Salam talks about the discrimination that takes place against the community using the new Love Jihad law. Mr. Salam, a pleasure to have you here. I want to start off by asking you, how would you describe the environment that is surrounding the Indian Muslims in the country today?
I guess it's very challenging. This is something we have not faced since 1947. Yes, we have had a case, in fact, for minorities in general, not just Muslims. We have had 1984, we have had 1992, we have had 2002, and even 2013. But those were essentially either inspired or fueled by certain politicians at the local level, or they were just sporadic instances confined to a particular part of the country. This is for the first time that we are seeing the entire social fabric of our country being torn apart by religious extremists espousing the cause of Hindutva.
So for an average everyday Indian, I mean the ones who are going to colleges, the ones who are studying, who are working, the ones who are doing their daily jobs, what does it become like now? I mean, is there an amount of insecurity and fear that surrounds them more than ever?
Yeah, I guess so. I have personally had more than 1 or 2 experiences over the last 3-4 years. And I have been born and brought up in Delhi all my life and never experienced something like that. In fact, I have lived a good part of my childhood in Lajpat Nagar, which was essentially a refugee colony of people who were displaced from Pakistan, with the creation of Pakistan, from Lahore, Rawalpindi, etc. But never saw or experienced that kind of discrimination and that kind of pressure as one experiences today. I'll give you a couple of examples. Just about 2 years ago, I had gone to a mall for my grocery purchase. And like in any mall, there were some people behind me, some people ahead of me. And the security in charge over there decided he let everybody go. But when my trolley came, he decided to examine each and every item. And I had gone for my monthly purchases.
Right.
So essentially, there were so many items and he was taking time. So I said in Urdu, I said, भैया इतनी देर क्यों लगा रहे हो? आपने सबको तो जाने दिया.
Right.
Then he said, आदमी देखकर काम किया जाता है.
Right. Right.
And that is when I lost it and I complained and I raised a fuss over there. But essentially, I could do it because I'm a journalist by profession and I'm associated with the Hindu.
Right.
So the manager came and he apologized and gave it to me in writing also. But imagine the plight of a common man who just goes to his shop or goes to his small-time office somewhere. He doesn't have access to media. So, and what he must be experiencing on a regular basis. Similarly, when I travel by metro, Delhi metro that is, occasionally, on 15th August, 26th Jan, there is heightened sense of security and checking. So everybody who travels by metro at that time is frisked a couple of times.
Right.
Whereas because I have a beard, I am frisked maybe 3 or 4 times.
Right.
And it's the same thing at the airport when one is frisked. The guy over there also at the counter will take more time in frisking my stuff, will often ask me to open my hand luggage or something like that. And this is something which I never experienced pre-2014.
Do you think the Prime Minister articulating things like identify them with their clothes in a speech that he gave during the CAA and RC protests, do you think all of this adds more layers to this sort of discrimination that's happening?
No, it's not a question of adding layers to it. He basically adds fuel to it, and basically the foot soldiers take over from there on. Right. Anti-CAA started as a protest, but it soon became a movement for equality. Right. And it was, yes, handled by Muslim women, but there were people from other communities who gradually joined in. At the same time, nobody was allowed to forget that the Prime Minister of India identifies a section of his citizens of India, with their clothes, essentially meaning that there was blatant discrimination in his mind. And that is something which had never taken place at the worst of times. Right. You see, the emergency, Indira Gandhi came down with an iron hand at virtually everybody. Mm-hmm. She did not discriminate on the basis of religion or caste at that time. We all suffered. But today, it's a certain section of the society which is held up and which is penalized for the most minor of mistakes, and whose basic, absolutely fundamental right to protest in a peaceful manner is sought to be taken away. Any protest by Muslims is immediately dubbed as anti-national, terror, and so on. It's like if you raise your voice against the government, you are an anti-national. Right. And there are plenty of things which this government has done wrong.
Right. I have to go back to a point where you talked about how because you were a journalist and you worked with the Hindu, you had a certain amount of privilege and therefore the apology from the mall came towards you. But I have to ask this question, and this is in relation to the book that you've written, of Saffron Kites and Skull Caps. You talked about a man named Ansar Ahmed Sheikh who had to use a false name in order to get housing in Pune. Later, when the man cleared the civil services exam, he was able to shed the false name. You wrote that with the selection, he had reached the upper echelons of our society where religious identity is not always paramount. Do you still believe that to be true? Do you still believe that there are echelons of our society that once Muslims reach there, their identity is not paramount? Do you still think that happens?
I would say it is gradually going away. A Muslim is a Muslim is a Muslim for this government, for Indian society, the new India society. You see, people like Amir Khan being trolled simply because his wife said that she was afraid to live in India, or she was living in fear in India. When something similar was said by Kangana Ranaut, people sprung to her defense in Mumbai. So it's a question of different folks, different strokes. When a Muslim expresses apprehension or doubt or expresses his insecurity due to constant lynching instances and so on, he is immediately advised to go to Pakistan. You see, it's much deeper than what appears to the common man. The rot is well entrenched in our society, in our polity. You see the way our successive governments in general, and this one in particular, has gone about redefining constituencies at the time of elections. The effort is always made in such a manner that the Muslims' purchasing power, bargaining power at the time of elections is impacted. So if one particular constituency in UP, say Nagina, had 40% Muslim representation earlier, it would be redesigned or reconstituted in such a manner that 20% of the population stays with Nagina for the seat and the other percent goes to the other seat. Something similar has been done in Rampur, something similar has been done in Bahrain. And even the seats which have been reserved for our scheduled caste brothers have largely been carved out of those places where Muslims are in a sizable percentage, say 30, 40%, where Muslims are in a negligible percent, 2%, 4%, 5%. Those seats have not been reserved for SCs.
Going forward on this, I wanted to ask you, I mean, we've seen the emergence of young leaders from the Muslim community. We've seen the emergence of young leaders like Sharjeel Imam, Afreen Fatima, Gulfisha Fatima, and so many others. Is this a sign of a newer leadership that is more assertive about their identity and therefore much better at resonating the issues that surround the community.
Yeah, this is a very heartwarming thing, which I've noticed over the last couple of years. The new generation of Muslim leaders is not ready to play the handmaiden of entrenched politicians, whatever their political party. They are not ready to reiterate the usual platitudes. They want their place under the sun, and they want their place as an Indian Muslim. They are not shy of their Muslim identity. They are not shy of their Indian identity. And I think it all came together beautifully in Shaheen Bagh. The way those hijab clad women, they held the tricolor in one hand and the constitution in the other. Yet at the time of their prayer, at the same place, they stood up and prayed individually or collectively. They did not try to don the so-called more acceptable apparel for a Muslim woman. They continue to wear their hijabs and their burqas. They continue to use Urdu, quote Ghalib and Iqbal when they had to put forward their demands. Yet they also sang Sare Jahan Se Acha God knows how many times a day, and they said Jan Gan Man God knows how many times a day. They basically snatched the tricolor away from the goons who have been frequenting the Muslim localities after tying the flag on their bike and then raising anti-Muslim slogans, as we saw in Kasganj in UP and as we saw in the Kathua rape also.
Right. So in the middle of all of this, when people make the remark that the Muslim community needs to undergo reformation and that it needs to start looking within, what do you make of that and what do you have to say for the calls of reformation that are made?
I think at the moment it is the majority community which needs to look within. They are being sold a dummy just as the Muslims were sold a dummy before 1947. What Jinnah did or sought to do with all Muslims before 1947, when India was one unit, is the same thing what is being attempted by Hindutva politicians today with the majority community. They are being sold a dream of Hindu Rashtra, just as Jinnah sold the dream of a Muslim nation in the form of Pakistan. Fortunately, Indian Muslims, or at least a sizable section of Indian Muslims, we understood the unholy designs of Jinnah and we stayed put in our motherland. It's now for the majority community, the Hindu community, to understand the nefarious designs of those propagating the concept of Hindu Rashtra and show them the door and abide by the constitution.
Right, right. And one last question.
I'll ask you one thing.
Yeah.
How many times, as a journalist, have you seen a movement led by people from the majority community where they are only espousing the constitution of India, where they are only singing Jan Gan Man? None. Yeah. But you've had this case in Shaheen Bagh.
Right, right. I have to ask you one last question because we're talking about the majority community and we're talking about the minority community. Do you think that there is some scope left of healing in the society? Do you think that we can go back and reverse the polarization, the divisions that have happened over the last few years? Do you think there is some scope or some possibility of that healing happening?
See, it's a long haul, but it is a definite possibility. I am not one to give up hope. I have been brought up in a multicultural society. I live in Noida, and my house for about 20 years has been right in front of Kalibadi in Noida, and I've never experienced any discrimination because of my religion over there. That is until last 5-6 years ago. And before that, I lived in Lajpat Nagar, and I've seen my brothers from the Hindu community, when they pass by a dargah or when they pass by a mosque, they slow down their vehicle, kind of nod out of respect towards the dargah, towards the khanqa or the masjid concern. So this pluralism is woven into our society. What has happened in last few years, politicians have worked very actively to weaken our social fabric. This is a challenge for us at the moment. At the same time, the roots of the Indian society are too deep to be impacted by one political dispensation for 5 or 10 years.
Mr. Ziya Us Salam, thank you so much for this interview. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking to you.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.